Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is presented for entertainment and commentary purposes, examining the dynamics of televised confrontation rather than asserting verified events. What happens when a titan of the silver screen is placed opposite a television host who confuses provocation with insight, confrontation with commentary, and volume with authority? What unfolds when two fundamentally different philosophies of public discourse collide, not behind closed doors, but under the unforgiving glare of studio lights, before a live audience, and millions watching at home? Today, we examine a moment that has since been dissected, debated, and dramatized across social media and pop culture commentary. The on-air collision that ended with Kate Winslet walking away from the stage and left Behar facing a stunned studio and an even more stunned public. This was not merely a disagreement, it was a clash of temperament, of professional boundaries, and of deeply different understandings of respect. It was a moment where decorum fractured, restraint evaporated, and the spectacle of live television revealed its sharpest edge. This is a chronicle of composure under pressure, of personal dignity tested in real time, and of the brutal chaos that erupts when invisible boundaries, long assumed to be mutually understood, are suddenly and publicly obliterated. From the moment Kate Winslet stepped onto the View's brightly lit stage, the atmosphere felt charged, crackling with an energy that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore. Winslet arrived not as a novice navigating hostile terrain, but as a veteran of the industry, an actor whose career has been shaped by discipline, craft, and a reputation for candor without cruelty. She was there in the wake of yet another critically acclaimed performance, expecting what most guests anticipate on such shows: a celebratory conversation, thoughtful questions, and perhaps a light-hearted exchange designed to humanize the star behind the accolades. What no one, neither the audience nor the producers nor, perhaps, even the hosts themselves, could have predicted was the breathtaking speed with which the interview would derail. At first, the exchange followed familiar rhythms. Polite introductions, applause, a brief acknowledgement of Winslet's recent work. Yet beneath the surface, something felt misaligned. The questions grew sharper, less curious and more accusatory. Commentary began to masquerade as inquiry. What might have been framed as discussion instead felt like provocation, each remark inching closer to confrontation. Winslet, to her credit, remained composed. Her responses were measured, articulate, and calm. She listened, she paused, she answered with nuance rather than defensiveness. But as the conversation progressed, it became increasingly clear that this was no longer an interview, it was a test of patience, a test of boundaries, a test of how much disrespect could be absorbed under the banner of just asking questions. Behar, long known for her sharp tongue and unapologetically confrontational style, leaned further into provocation. The tone hardened, interruptions became more frequent. The line between critique and condescension blurred until it effectively vanished. In the studio, laughter from the audience sounded uncertain, scattered, unsure whether it was still appropriate to treat the exchange as entertainment. Winslet's posture shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. She straightened, signaling a quiet resolve. Her expression remained controlled, but her eyes reflected something deeper, disappointment, perhaps, or the dawning realization that this conversation was no longer being conducted in good faith. What followed was not an explosion, but something far more powerful: restraint. Instead of raising her voice, Winslet did the opposite. She spoke more softly, more deliberately. She articulated her discomfort with clarity and professionalism, explaining, not accusing, why the tone of the discussion felt less like dialogue and more like ambush. It was a masterclass in composure, the kind that only emerges when someone understands both their worth and their limits. And then came the moment that froze the room. Winslet stood. There was no dramatic gesture, no final insult hurled across the table. She simply rose from her seat, thanked the remaining hosts politely, and stated that she would not continue a conversation that no longer respected mutual boundaries. The audience fell silent. The cameras lingered. The illusion of control that live television relies upon shattered in real time. Behar appeared momentarily stunned, caught between indignation and disbelief. The studio, once buzzing with scripted spontaneity, now felt exposed. Raw, uncomfortable, this was no longer entertainment. It was consequence. As Winslet exited the stage, the weight of the moment settled in. Viewers at home replayed the clip again and again, parsing tone, intention, and responsibility. Some applauded Winslet's refusal to engage further. Others defended Behar's confrontational style as part of the show's identity, but few could deny one truth: something fundamental had been laid bare. This was not simply about two personalities clashing. It was about power dynamics on televised platforms, about the fine line between challenging questions and performative hostility, about the expectation, particularly placed on guests, that they must endure disrespect in the name of ratings, relevance, or good television. In walking away, Winslet reframed the narrative. She reminded audiences that dignity is not weakness, that boundaries are not arrogance, and that professionalism does not require silent compliance. The aftermath rippled outward, igniting broader conversations about media ethics, interview culture, and the responsibility that comes with having a microphone and an audience. This televised collision was not planned, rehearsed, or easily forgotten. It was a moment where the mask slipped, where live television revealed its volatility, and where one individual chose self-respect over spectacle. Now the verdict is yours. Was this an act of justified restraint, or an overreaction to a show built on confrontation? Did professional decorum triumph, or did it collide with the harsh realities of modern broadcast entertainment? Subscribe, reflect, and cast your own judgment on this unscripted trial, because moments like these remind us that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't shouted into a microphone, but made by walking away from it. "Welcome back to The View, everyone," Whoopi Goldberg announced, her warm smile settling over the studio like a familiar comfort. Her voice carried the practiced ease of someone who had guided conversations through calm waters and storms alike. "We're here this morning with the phenomenal Kate Winslet, who is headlining what critics are already calling the performance of her career." Applause rippled across the set as Kate Winslet took her seat at the table. She was draped in understated elegance, her presence effortless, the kind of poise that could not be manufactured or rehearsed. It was the quiet confidence of a woman who had spent decades refining her craft, surviving scrutiny, and emerging with her integrity intact. She smiled graciously, nodding toward the audience and then toward the panel. "Thank you so much for having me, Whoopi," Kate said warmly. "It's truly a pleasure to be here." The opening moments unfolded exactly as expected: comfortable, celebratory, safe. Sarah Haynes leaned in with thoughtful curiosity, asking Kate about her approach to inhabiting complex characters and how she prepared emotionally for such demanding roles. Sunny Hostin followed, praising the film's social relevance and the way it tackled difficult truths with empathy and restraint. Kate answered with ease, speaking eloquently about storytelling, responsibility, and the privilege of being trusted with narratives that mattered. She spoke of collaboration, of listening to directors and co-stars, of honoring the lived experiences reflected on screen. Her passion was unmistakable, the same passion that had earned her critical acclaim, global admiration, and an Academy Award. She was in every sense a master at work. The conversation flowed smoothly, laughter punctuating moments of reflection. The audience was engaged, the energy was light, and then, from across the table, Joy Behar leaned forward. It was a subtle shift, but unmistakable to anyone who had watched the show long enough. That familiar smirk, half amusement, half provocation, began to form on her lips. Loyal viewers knew it well. It was the expression that often preceded chaos, the quiet warning that the tone was about to change. "So, Kate," Joy began, her voice coated in a sweetness that felt oddly corrosive, "I must raise an issue that's been troubling me." The table stilled. "You've graced Hollywood for, 30 years now?" Joy continued, tilting her head slightly. "And yet you still seem to pursue these youthful romantic narratives." The words hung in the air, heavier than they had any right to be. "Don't you think," Joy added, "that it might be time to accept that those chapters are closed?" The studio fell into a deafening silence. Even the audience, usually quick to react, seemed unsure how to respond. The playful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a palpable discomfort. Whoopi's smile stiffened. Sarah's eyes flicked briefly toward Kate. Sunny's posture straightened, her expression sharpening. For a split second, Kate's smile faltered, a hairline crack in the flawless composure. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Then, just as quickly, she regained control, her face settling back into calm professionalism. "I'm sorry, Joy," Kate said gently, her tone measured and courteous, "but I'm not certain I understand your implication." Joy raised an eyebrow, as though the point were obvious. "Well," she said, waving a hand lightly, "Hollywood has a habit of clinging to youth, and you're still playing women in love, women desired. Isn't there a point where one should move on?" The silence deepened. Kate folded her hands neatly on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but something firmer had entered it, an undercurrent of resolve. "I find that question fascinating," she replied, "because it assumes that romance, desire, and emotional depth belong exclusively to youth." She paused, allowing the thought to settle. "Love doesn't expire," Kate continued. "Connection doesn't have an age limit, and storytelling, particularly honest storytelling, demands that we reflect the full spectrum of human experience, not just the version that feels comfortable." Joy opened her mouth, but Kate went on. "I've spent my career portraying women as they are complex, flawed, passionate, evolving, women who love deeply at 20 and at 50, women whose lives don't shrink as they age, but expand." Sunny nodded subtly. Sarah smiled. "To suggest that these stories should simply end," Kate said calmly, "is to suggest that women themselves should fade quietly into the background, and I don't subscribe to that idea." The audience stirred, murmurs of approval rippling through the room. Whoopi leaned in slightly, her voice warm but deliberate. "I think a lot of people would agree with that, Kate." Kate smiled at her gratefully. "Art reflects society," Kate added. "And if society is uncomfortable seeing women, over a certain age, centered in stories of love and desire, then that discomfort is exactly what art should challenge." Joy leaned back in her chair, lips pressed thin, her smirk finally fading. The applause began softly, then grew stronger, filling the studio. Kate sat composed, her expression serene, not triumphant, but assured. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't deflected with humor, she had simply spoken the truth, plainly and without apology. The conversation moved on, but the moment lingered, because something had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. It was the kind of argument that wears the costume of empowerment while quietly hollowing it out from the inside, a fantasy peddled to the masses that women past 40 can still command the spotlight as leading ladies, so long as they do so within carefully policed limits. A reassurance wrapped in contradiction, a promise that feels generous on the surface, yet collapses under scrutiny. It lacks realism not because women over 40 are incapable of carrying stories, but because the industry's acceptance of that truth remains conditional, fragile, and easily revoked. And in that moment the camera, an unblinking, merciless eye, captured everything, every micro-expression, every tremor, every fleeting flicker of disbelief that danced across Kate's features as she absorbed the unfolding ambush. This was not outrage, not yet. It was recognition, the recognition that she had not been invited into a conversation, but into a judgment, that she was no longer being spoken with, but spoken about. Here she stood, a titan of her craft, one of the most celebrated actresses of her generation, a performer whose career had been forged through discipline, reinvention, and undeniable skill. And yet, across the table, she was being informed, casually, confidently, that her own experience had rendered her obsolete, that the very years spent mastering her art were now liabilities, that her vintage, as it was so delicately framed, disqualified her from the work she had already proven she could do. The cruelty of it lay not in the words alone, but in the certainty with which they were delivered. "Joy," Kate began. The name landed softly, but the room shifted instantly. Her British accent sharpened, as it always did when emotional stakes rose, when precision became necessary, when every syllable mattered. Her tone was measured, deliberate, controlled. This was not a woman lashing out. This was a woman choosing her footing carefully before stepping onto unstable ground. "I find I must ask you something." The phrasing was polite, almost gentle, but beneath it was steel. Would this line of questioning ever be directed at a male actor? A pause, the air tightened. Would you dare ask George Clooney or Brad Pitt if they've aged out of romantic consideration? The question was not rhetorical. It was surgical. Joy scoffed, not laughed, scoffed, a sound of dismissal, sharp and unfiltered, as though the comparison itself were absurd, as though the premise did not merit serious engagement. "That is a world away from this," she replied. "And you know it." Kate did not retreat. "How precisely is it different?" She countered, her body inching forward, subtly closing the space between them. The movement was instinctive, not aggressive, a physical manifestation of intellectual pressure. "Explain the difference, Joy." The challenge hung in the air, unanswered for a beat too long. "Men and women age on different trajectories." Joy said at last, "Men acquire distinction. We are simply left with age. That is the cold, hard truth of it." The studio fell silent. Not the kind of silence that follows applause or laughter, but the kind that arrives uninvited, heavy, absolute, the sort of hush so profound you could have heard a tear strike the floor. Even the audience seemed unsure how to exist within it, caught between discomfort and awe. Behind the cameras, the crew stood frozen. Producers, technicians, assistants, people trained to anticipate chaos, were utterly captivated by the slow-motion train wreck unfolding before them. This was live television, stripped of its armor. No scripts, no safety nets, just two ideologies colliding in real time. Kate's gaze locked onto Joy. It was a long, inscrutable moment. Not anger, not shock. Something deeper. A calculation. A reckoning. A decision forming behind her eyes. When she finally spoke again, her voice was a sheath of iron control, barely concealing the inferno beneath. "So that is it, then," she said calmly. "Men age into relevance while women age out of it. That is the truth we are expected to accept." She did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She did not posture. Her restraint made the words heavier, not lighter. "What you are describing," she continued, "is not reality. It is a system. A system that rewards men for survival and punishes women for longevity." The room felt smaller now, as though the walls themselves were leaning in. "You frame this as inevitability," Kate said, "when in fact it is a choice, a narrative we keep repeating until it feels natural, until women begin to internalize it, until we apologize for occupying space we've already earned." Joy shifted in her seat, visibly unsettled. Kate pressed on, "I have spent decades refining my craft. I have played lovers, leaders, mothers, villains, survivors, and yet you suggest that time itself has diminished my capacity to tell stories of desire, complexity, or relevance." She paused. "That is not truth, that is convenience." The audience sat motionless, no applause, no murmurs, just attention. "What troubles me most," Kate concluded, "is not that this belief exists, but that it is spoken aloud as though it were neutral, as though it were merely observation rather than judgment." She leaned back then, reclaiming her space. "And if that is the framework through which women are evaluated here," she said quietly, "then perhaps this is not a conversation I wish to continue." The weight of her words lingered long after she stopped speaking. This was no tantrum, no dramatic flourish. It was a refusal, clear, dignified, and devastating in its simplicity. A refusal to be diminished under the guise of honesty. A refusal to accept that aging, for women, must always be framed as erosion rather than accumulation. In that moment, the spectacle of television gave way to something rarer, accountability, and whether one agreed with her or not, whether one defended the format or criticized it, one truth became impossible to ignore. The illusion had cracked. "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, waving a dismissive hand as though swatting away an insect. "Time waits for no one. Shouldn't you be transitioning into roles more appropriate for your station, playing mothers, perhaps even grandmothers, instead of vying for parts against actresses half your age?" A sharp inhale rippled across the table. Whoopi shifted in her chair, a silent alarm flashing behind her eyes. She had moderated countless heated conversations, but she recognized this moment instantly. The interview had taken a dark turn, hostile, personal, and unnecessary. "Joy, I think," Whoopi began. No, let me land my point." Joy cut in sharply, her voice hardening like a blade being drawn. "I am simply giving voice to what the world is already thinking." Kate's gaze remained steady, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the strain. "There is an air of desperation." Joy continued, undeterred. when older actresses cling to roles meant for women in their 20s and 30s. It is not a flattering portrait, Kate. The color drained from Kate's face, the remark striking with surgical cruelty. But when she spoke, her voice stood firm, a fortress built through years of scrutiny and survival. Joy, Kate said carefully, I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding. She folded her hands together, grounding herself. The character I portray is a woman in her 40s, navigating intensely adult conflicts. Identity, grief, responsibility, love shaped by experience. This is not about age. It is about telling stories with substance. A harsh, dismissive laugh burst from Joy. Stories with substance, she scoffed. Oh, spare me. You're playing dress up, pretending to be a version of yourself that no longer exists. The audience audibly gasped that. Joy continued, leaning forward, is the actor's trade. I understand that. But there is a vast gulf between acting and utter delusion. Delusion, Kate echoed softly. The word hovered in the air, ghost-like. The hurt in her eyes was unmistakable now. Raw, unguarded, deeply human. Joy, that is enough. Whoopi commanded, her voice now ironclad, authority replacing warmth. But Joy was relentless. Look, I'm not trying to be vicious, she claimed, even as her tone contradicted every word. I'm simply being truthful. Hollywood has a sickness. It refuses to allow women to age with dignity. And when an artist of your stature continues to accept these unsuitable parts, you're feeding the disease. Kate inhaled deeply, a shaky but controlled breath. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap, knuckles whitening as she steadied herself. I must say, Joy, Kate began, her voice quiet but resolute, I am utterly floored by this entire line of attack. She lifted her gaze, eyes glistening but unwavering. I came here to discuss a film, a narrative woven with themes of resilience, identity, and the fragile, beautiful complexity of human connection. The age of my character, as I understood it, was a mere footnote, totally inconsequential to the story being told. She paused. But was it? The question lingered, not weak but searching. Joy sensed it immediately. Like a predator detecting the faintest crack in armor, she pressed forward. Because from where I'm sitting. Joy said coolly, this looks like yet another chapter in Hollywood's refusal to let go. Another example of someone unwilling to accept the natural order of things. Kate's jaw tightened. The natural order, she repeated. You mean the one where men continue to play romantic leads well into their 70s, while women are politely escorted off-screen the moment they're deemed inconvenient? The audience erupted into murmurs. I reject that order, Kate said firmly, not because I'm afraid of aging, but because I refuse to be erased by it. Joy rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. No, Kate replied, her voice rising just enough to command the room. You don't get to disguise cruelty as honesty. She straightened in her chair. What you're describing as dignity is actually disappearance, silence, compliance, and I won't participate in that. Sunny Hostin nodded openly now. Sarah Haynes looked visibly moved. I am proud of my age, Kate continued. I am proud of the lines on my face, the life they represent, the stories they allow me to tell. If that unsettles you, or anyone else, it says far more about the limitations of their imagination than it does about my career. Joy opened her mouth, but Whoopi raised a hand. We're going to pause right there, Whoopi said firmly, because what's happening now isn't critique, it's disrespect. The applause began hesitantly, then swelled into something undeniable. Kate exhaled slowly, the tension releasing just enough for her to breathe. I have no interest in clinging to youth, she added softly. I am clinging to truth, and if truth makes people uncomfortable, then perhaps it's doing exactly what art is meant to do. Joy leaned back, arms crossed, her expression tight. The conversation moved on, but the moment did not dissolve. It lingered in the studio, heavy and unavoidable, because something fundamental had been exposed. And everyone watching, at home and in that room, felt it.